Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this virtual salon. I'm Daniella Topol, and I'm going to be guiding us through this conversation. And I will invite you all, if you feel, whoever feels up for this and willing, to turn on their videos so that this can actually be a video conversation with all of us as opposed to one of those webinars. We just want to get close. We're so sad to be far apart. Um, so before anything else, I want to share a land acknowledgement video with you from the American Indian Community House. So we will share that with you, and when the chat is back in, as the chat is running, feel free to share what lands you are on right now as well. We encourage you to do that. So we will be sharing this video with you in just a moment.
Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. The land of the 5 boroughs that make up New York City are the traditional homelands of the Lenape, Merrick, Canarsie, Rockaway, Matinecock, and Haudenosaunee peoples. These lands are also the intertribal trade lands and are under the stewardship of many more indigenous nations today. New York City is home to the largest populations of intertribal Native American, First Nations, and indigenous individuals out of any urban city across Turtle Island, the United States. We acknowledge the systematic erasure of many nations and recognize those still among us today.
Great. So there is so much to discuss with our 5 very moving guests and who are doing incredible things to organize and to make change and make impact. And I'm going to share, have them share with you who they are and what keeps them going. And the whole purpose of our hour together is to learn more about what each of them are doing, to share ways of getting more involved and meeting new people. And that's what all these virtual salons are all about. So I'd love to first start with Iakowi to share a little bit about herself and her work.
Sure. Okay. Sego. Sego, Sewagwego. My name is Iakowi. This means she gathers and organizes people. This name was given to me by clan mothers in the Longhouse through a naming ceremony. I am Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse, or more widely known as the Iroquois Confederacy. I'm a Mohawk woman who resides in Akwesasne Mohawk territory where I was born and raised, following in my skywalking family migrations to New York City, also known as Mannahatta, homelands of the Lenape. I steward knowledge passed down to me by my grandparents and traditional leaders of my nation. I carry knowledge of Northern and Southern tribal art, fashion, business, politics, and leadership, completed multiple degrees and certifications. I have had the opportunity to study in Montreal, New York City, Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong. Throughout my life, at a very early age, I experienced Canadian Army tanks and heavy artillery in my backyard, blockades on my street, and no school due to military occupation in Akwesasne Mohawk territory for months at a time. From the Oka crisis in 1990 to Akwesasne and Ganawage being under siege by the Canadian military of up to 5,000 troops at a time, I, as a young child, and we, Haudenosaunee, remained in unity like a bundle of arrows, unbreakable together. Raised in this way, my outlook was conditioned to naturally apply the same energy and convictions when it comes to who we are and what is most important. From the great law of peace, the Turo Wampum, and the maintenance of the good mind principles and the simple tenets of the warrior society, carrying the burden of peace and freedom together in unity, awareness, and resistance, we remain and persist unmoved. As a younger adult, and to this day, I apply the same energy. I organized and rallied movements in tandem from Akwesasne to NYC in accordance with I Don't Know More, Two Row Wampum campaign renewal, pipeline resistance, anti-racism, climate justice, defunding, no DAPL, indigenous sovereignty, and Black liberation movements. Today, being in my second year as the executive director of the American Indian Community House, established in 1969, and through a multitude of other institutions and organizations, I further my commitments through targeted actions, open dialogues, teaching, solution-driven programming, stewardship, advocacy, activism, and leadership. I am also a custom designer of jewelry, regalia, shoes, and clothing, and founder of Mohawk Coterie and Guio Couture, where you can follow my pop-up shops, inquire about custom creations, and/or learn through specialized makers workshops that I teach. Yawak Goa for all being present and sharing space.
Thank you so very much for sharing your words about yourself. Alejo, can I turn it over to you?
Do you have an option of declining right now? It's a little too soon, but yeah, you can turn it over to me. So my name is Alejo Rodriguez. I am the chief of curriculum and storytelling for Zealous. It's a public defender advocacy organization. Also director of strategy and engagement for the Center of Institutional and Social Change at Columbia Law School, and board member of the Parole Prep Project here in New York as well. My background has come in engagement with the arts and organizing has come from very untraditional backgrounds. I served 32 years in prison, released in 2017. Most of my advocacy, or most of my introduction to advocacy and organizing, started while I was in prison, where it was a matter of just working with those who have been, in many respects, hopeless and feeling helpless, and how to galvanize that. And the arts play a very significant role in looking at of the messaging and advocacy in a new way, and looking at advocacy beyond simply just putting up placards and seeking for policy change, but just claiming for human rights change for those while we're in those incarcerated spaces. The work still continues, and just really glad to be able to have connected with some very strong institutions who have an equal support in the vision that I have, and just really really inspired to be a part of this program. Oh, by the way, I'm also on the board for Network Support Services, which is it's a reentry organization in the South Bronx. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Daniela.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Alejo. Lisa Fortes.
I have too many tiles up. Thank you so much, Daniela, and it's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists who are all clearly rock stars in the work that they're doing as advocates and activists for many communities. My name is Lisa Portes. I use she, her, ella. I am the co-founder and current advisory board member of the Latinx Theater Commons, which was founded in 2012 and is a national network and think tank comprised of theater makers and scholars from across the country who are dedicated to advocating for Latinx stories as central to the American story. And when I say the American story, I mean of American as todas las Americas, North, South, Central. We operate on a horizontal leadership model, and as a Commons, anyone is welcome to participate in any of our activities. Additionally, I serve as co-chair of my union, SDC, which is the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society. I serve as co-chair of my union's Political Engagement Committee, whose mission is to engage our membership in legislative and political action that benefits ultimately our members and our members' communities. Recent action has been focused on congressional relief bills, if they ever happen. Working with our sister unions in the Congressional Black and Hispanic caucuses to forward equitable hiring practices and protections for BIPOC performing art makers at the policy level. And lately, we've been doing a whole lot of rallying our membership to get out the vote. Additionally, I serve as the head of directing at the theater school at DePaul University and on the board of TCG, which is revisioning itself as which is a service organization advocating for a just and thriving ecosystem in the American theater.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And Chris Myers.
Hi, I'm Chris Myers. My internet is bad, so sorry if it cuts out. Just let me know, and I'll try to pause until it gets better. I'm an actor primarily. I write occasionally, and I think I'm here primarily because of my work as a political educator as of late. When the pandemic hit, I was in rehearsals for what was supposed to be my Broadway debut, and then the world kind of accelerated its falling apart, which was already, in my opinion, been in motion. And I decided to use that opportunity to get people invested in class politics. So I run a study group called Anti-Capitalism for Artists. I work with 4 cohorts that meet once a week. They are presented with 4 to 5 hours of material, and then we meet for 2 hours to unpack it all and relate it to our lives. I am now in my second run of that, but exciting stuff has already come out of the first run. One of the people who was in the study groups is a producer at Soho Rep, and if you saw recently, they announced that they're bringing some of their resident artists onto salary and giving them health insurance. That is something that Cynthia devised because of what she felt she learned in our study group. And there's plenty of other stuff in the works. I'm actually building something with Natasha and her Beehive Dramaturgy Collective. So this isn't just about reading books and like getting smart. It is about taking that knowledge and going back into our artistic communities and institutions and trying to treat artists as the workers that they are, but also have artists understand that they are workers. I think that's actually a more fundamental issue, that we are laborers and thus need to engage in labor-centered politics. So I guess my other big aim with my work is I love all the existing conversations we're having around race and gender and sexuality and that kind of equity. And I just personally feel that without a rigorous class politics, we get concessions at best, if anything. A lot of times we just get high fives and, you know, social media posts and hashtags. And I really actually want material change. So that's my goal. And that's what I do. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. And Natasha.
Hello. Yes, Chris's cohorts are amazing. Just for anyone listening who doesn't know about them already, it was amazing. So you should definitely look into that. I'm Natasha, she, her. I am a producer and dramaturg. I recently was at Signature Theater and will be moving into the position of Associate Artistic Director at Playwrights Horizons. I also do a bunch of freelance work, and I'm a co-founder of Beehive Dramaturgy Studio, as Chris was mentioning. And I consider a lot of work that has now been labeled EDIA or diversity or anti-racism or activism even, to be really part of responsible and exciting producing and dramaturging. But beyond that, I don't really call myself an activist, which is maybe just out of respect for folks on this call who do this work so much more and just more deeply than I do. I try to amplify that work, and that's I feel where I can be helpful. But that said, I do think this sort of work needs to be done from different angles, in like a multiplicity of ways. So I'm happy to offer whatever I can here today and to really listen to and learn from the other folks here. And I think the reason why Daniella asked me here today is because over the summer, 2 other artists, Ella Rose Cherry and Jay Stoll, and I started Amplifying Activists Together, which is a grassroots group open to anyone who lives, works, or plays in New York State and wants to consistently take direct action in progressive and radical movements that are really led by longtime organizers. So we follow the longtime organizers. We meet on Zoom weekly. This week and next, it's at Friday It's on Friday at 1. I think we're posting that into the chat. Yes, thank you, Kaz. And we walk you through the steps of what to do during that 1 hour. Obviously, there's much more to do than 1 hour, but 1 hour a week feels like 1 hour of constant specific work is more than a lot of folks are actually doing. It's a lot of talking right now. And so this is just a way to get into some more action. We usually have also a really great speaker who is a longtime leader of a movement. So this week we have Mateo Guerrero, and next week we have Steve Weaver regarding housing justice next week and trans rights this week. But we're calling about all of this every week. So anyway, this effort is really to gather collectively and take action steps for progressive and radical movements. It's practicing solidarity, and Ella J and I are just trying to make it easy to get into it, and then also hopefully folks will get into it even more than that, because all of this feeds back into a healthier theater world too. It's all foundational, right? So we're trying to focus on that, especially in this moment when we can't focus on productions exactly.
Great. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And I feel so lucky that we're in conversation with the five of you, and that you're doing so much organizing in different kinds of ways. And I'm going to sort of toss a question out and take it and pick up the ball as you may. It's first about sort of where the need, what the origin story of organizing came from for you. I mean, Iakowi talked about this is her namesake. So, and Alejo referenced time, when he was incarcerated. But the reality is that any individual can be an organizer in any way. And so, where did this germ begin for you? When did you start organizing? What and how have you grown as an organizer in a way that you think would be useful for others to hear about? Like, how have you found your strength in this area?
I'll just say one quick thing. I hold a couple of kind of heroes to guide me in this work, and one of them is Kwame Ture. And I just want to actually just throw this into the room for everybody, that he speaks of a distinction between mobilization and organization. And I think actually my journey to whatever this work is started as mobilization. And for him, the distinction is there's an issue, people are angry, rightfully so, they come out, take to the streets, they protest. If they're young and it's their first time, they do it for months and months and months, and next year something else happens and they do it again and they do. And the thing about mobilization is eventually you do get exhausted, you get tired, you realize you're not going to get the thing that you want, and you get defeated. Whereas organization is about the people being in kind of sustainable formations with a variety of different skill sets, with, hopefully non-hierarchical leadership, so that if the movement's leader burns out, it doesn't all die, right? So for me, actually, it started with being angry about stuff. It started with just boots on the ground protesting. And then it became about understanding the necessity of getting people organized. And organization doesn't have to be like big tent theory. I am a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and that's how they kind of view themselves, as a big tent socialist party. You're not going to have any one person kind of telling you what socialism needs to be. But I'm actually more interested in people coming together in their own kind of organizational models. I think here of the Combahee River Collective's vision of identity politics, which is not like a bad thing. It's about saying, I enter into this political process, this radicalization process, from what affects me now. So if I'm a Black woman or a gay white man, we're going to have different things that bring us into this struggle, and we should start there. So I'm actually interested in organization as working from where we are and forming links so that we have these durable movements that can ultimately take us through the complete system change that we need to all have the things that we want.
Yeah, I'll just add to that a bit, which is maybe somewhat similar. I guess organizing to me means like offering forward and inspiring concept or action while couching it in like context and pacing. And maybe the pacing is maybe that speaks to what you were just saying, Chris, like activating forward um, as part of a larger goal. For me, it's like larger personal and emotional work, but also larger collective strategy so that it can be sustained. And so it isn't a lot of people just darting into different directions, which is what I sort of felt this summer when the protests happened and then theater was responding to that because they were sort of forced to. Felt strange to me, and I was pulled into a lot of action groups where the vibe was sort of theater can save us anew in some brand new way, and that felt strange to me, knowing what I do know about, you know, the activists who are working on this day in and day out, and then also knowing that there's a lot I don't know. So I guess for me, it's a lot about being able to follow the folks who have that strategy in mind and also offering forward those ideas and taking steps sustainably so that because that's something that I think I didn't do until pretty recently was really sustain what I was doing. I would go into it and out of it in spurts. But now I'm more interested in finding a level that I can maintain and pulling more people in. So just sustaining and pulling more people in for me feels like what it is.
I want to amplify what both Chris and Natasha are speaking about, because I think one thing that you said, Chris, which I just think is so wise, is that it has to start from the personal. I think otherwise it's performative, right? If you're not starting from, if you're not coming off of your personal values in some way, your personal ethics, personal anger, your personal something, then it's then the action can, that's where we run into kind of performative activism. I appreciate what you said, Natasha. I wouldn't call myself an activist. I'd call myself an advocate. And I think the process has been, it's accrued over time. I direct primarily work by women and writers of color. I always have, not politically. Those are the stories I've always been drawn to, the narratives I've been drawn to. And as you do that work, and where you're trying to center folks who are not traditionally centered, you find out just exactly how not traditionally centered people are. And then that leads to more action. The Latinx Theater Commons was formed with a group of people that, we're talking about how long have we been at this? Coming from Teatro Campesino, how long have we been at this work, and what do we need to do now? And then, what's exciting is, moving into it at the union level, because I was taken with what you said about artists as laborers, and we don't think enough about artists as labor. I was on a call today with the Department of Professional Employees, which is the area, the kind of umbrella organization, the umbrella union under the AFL-CIO for the entertainment industries. And, talking about how we make racial justice, how we go at it on a policy level, and where can we go at it on a policy level so that the impact is real and is dollars for laborers and uplifts laborers who haven't been traditionally, the arts in general haven't been traditionally uplifted, but within that, the BIPOC community of artists. So I'd say it has to start, I think organizing or involving oneself must start from in your heart first, because then it just keeps happening. And the longer you go, the deeper you go.
Alejo or Iakowi?
Yeah, I'll jump in on there. I love this where she left off, where Lisa left off, and it has to start in your heart first. The thing about it is sometimes it's not that starting in the heart is not always this romantic feeling. I think Chris mentioned earlier, sometimes it comes from a place of anger. a place of outrage. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of my work started while I was in prison, and yet even though after serving 32 years in prison, I realized wholly that my um, uh, journey wasn't just confined to my prison experience. Like I've experienced a legacy of failing institutions since I was a child, right? And it has an impact, and it lands in a way where for a young boy going into a young man, that a lot of times we don't have the capacity or awareness or the wherewithal to express in any kind of articulate way, and it turns out into a different kind of a rage. And I'm thinking now, right now, a lot of the protests that was happening during the course of right after the George Floyd murder, and how a lot of young men were being criticized for breaking windows and all that. And in as much as I hated to see that, I definitely understood where it came from. It came from this place of knowing and realizing the depth of structural injustice, this acceptance that society has built on it, this place of like indifference to structural injustice based on race, and like for so long people have for like it's okay, like it's like we're okay as a whole to have what we consider in this country to be marginalized communities. Like we actually say that disenfranchised communities, we know exactly what we're talking about, and we say it as if it's okay that that exists, and yet the people that live in that do not feel okay with that. But where do they express that? And so I say that because that's in the area in which that led in large part to my incarceration. All of that background of dealing with in the indifference of institutional or lack of institutional support, from healthcare to education to lack of employment. All these factors played a role, and so I think there was an awakening that occurred while I was in prison, and the awakening was the shift or that pivot. The outrage and the anger still stayed the same, but it was a pivot into a more or less destructive way of expressing and articulating the injustice that was occurring. So it's been a journey, but it's not a journey that once again, and I loved it, and I agree wholeheartedly. It must come from the heart, and sometimes it's inspired by a sense of injustice, and it comes out as anger, right? And yet, I love reading the stories of the Frederick Douglasses of the world and the Martin Luther Kings, and I love hearing these stories and the outcomes, and they inspire me. But the thing about it, when you're in it, it isn't romantic. It's nothing pretty, nothing pretty. And just accepting that and knowing how to move within that, ride that wave if you could, and realizing that if I fall off that virtual surfboard, that I can drown, but I still have to surf either way, and try the best I can. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Iakowi, did you want to jump in on this question as well?
Sure. My internet's really unstable. Just let me know if I cut out. So what brought me to organizing or to like this position? Like what inspired me? Is that the question?
Yeah, and I think we're now in the place of like riffing on the heart and the personal, what that heartbeat. So yes, absolutely.
Okay. So for me, organizing is like second nature. It's who I am and who my people are. When you think of the term Haudenosaunee people, it means that we are the people that build. And that means like building a house, a longhouse, which is a structure. That structure being according to the instructions of like the Great Law of Peace. So organizing is who we are, in other words. And it's a responsibility to community. Community isn't an entitlement, it is a responsibility. And that's how I move and how I play my part as a human in within my nation and also within my community here in New York City. I think that sort of trying to navigate and trying to exist within Western society and to still try to maintain who I am naturally and who my people want to be or who they might not know they are, or things that, you know, should be brought back to our lives, such as like being matrilineal, honoring women in leadership again, bringing that back to the forefront, and just moving in non-hierarchical ways, as somebody had mentioned earlier. But like not just thinking about these things or talking about them, but actually applying them within structures of either where you work or within your community, or just like programs or projects that, you know, I implement and, you know, adhere to, and also try to carry forth with whoever's in the space. It's survival, you know, but it's not just survival being organized. You have to be organized to survive, especially as a marginalized people out here. But you also have to figure out how to live in peace also with everything that's got us, you know, in a chokehold as well. And sometimes that's at least making spaces for your people to be who they naturally are safely. And so for me, oftentimes, I like to create spaces that are all native everything. Native costume designers, native playwrights, native actors, native producers, everything for us, by us. And organizing in that way within theater and in art in general, for me is one of my priorities, just because as Ungwehunwe people, which means the original people, Ungwehunwe Neha means the original people in our way of life. So for us to move like in different industries, or to exist or create pathways in different industries such as theater or the arts, creating spaces so our people can feel that energy and feel what it feels like to be in an all native space with, you know, their people, and feeling safe, and just it's a different sort of synergy that we don't get to experience, but it's something that we are doing right now. And it's everything, you know, it's like everything for us in a good way, but it's everything we're doing or I'm doing at AICH, all native everything, just because I need to empower our people to a place where they know that they can go out and really move forward with confidence, with support, with backup and alliance, and really, you know, create a space for us. You know, we're trying to we're not really trying to break into the industry. We are trying to create our own sectors of these industry for us and by us. And I think, I don't know if anybody else here that's listening has ever had a chance to check out Native Theater Thursdays that we've been doing throughout the pandemic at the American Indian Community House. If you have a chance, you can look us up on YouTube and you'll see all the different play readings that we did starting the first month of the pandemic. I think during the pandemic, it was like kind of just in my first year in leadership at the American Indian Community House, and it being like one of the most hardest times. You know, you can't plan for this. Not trained for this. Like, how do we carry our community forward in a healthy way? And that is trying to create peaceful spaces for them. And I feel that like we accomplished that through our programming. If you check out our YouTube, you'll see all the programming we did throughout the pandemic for about 6 months straight. Every week we had about 5 programs a week and had our community totally immersed in activities, in theater, in talking spaces, and elders and youth alike. So I think really stepping up when times are hard, but also maintaining what's natural to you and your people. And for us, what's most sacred is creation. Creation meaning people, the land, all the elements, the animals, and moving in a way forward that respects all those things in a way that doesn't possess those things or dominate them, but in a way that is at peace with them and in balance. So that's what drives me, because it's rare to find a space like that. Thank you.
Great. And this probably, what you all are talking about is going to kind of dovetail into another question I'm going to throw out to you. And then I'm going to also say, feel free to share questions in the chat because we'll have time for some questions. And if you don't have your video on, but you feel like you might want to, it would be lovely to see everyone who's listening here if you feel up for that, just so that we can continue to see your faces while we have this dialogue. So in our prep call, we were talking about number of questions to chat about, and I think it was Chris that asked that throughout, let's talk about what our goals are. Why are you doing this work? What are you moving towards? And Iakowi was just talking about some of those things, and I thought it'd be a good question to throw out to all of you. What are your goals? What is not just how have you been an organizer, and where did that come from? What part of your heart and what part of your life experience? But what are you moving towards? What is the future that you want to be seeing? What are you dreaming about? What are you moving towards? Which maybe dovetails on a second question that Chris had in our prep call, which is like, what does freedom mean to you? So I would sort of want to toss that question out to our wonderful guests and see what they have to say about it.
Well, okay, I'll start. It is it's a hard question. I ask all the people in my study groups, what does freedom mean to you? And this is exactly what happens every time. I'm sure we all panelists have some, but I mean, even if I turned it over to this entire group of everybody watching here, I feel like we might get 1 or 2 people who have an answer at the ready. And I think that actually is, so I want the freest world possible, right? And what that means is, for me, I think the American, and I do mean not Republican, I mean truly American conception of freedom is kind of around negative liberty. Like, you can't tell me what to do, that makes me free. I think we see that, for instance, with why people don't want to wear masks. And, you can say it's a kind of ignorant, mythical, poor white Trump lover or something like that. But the richest of them, right, will do the ACB like confirmation event and just wiping their nose. You can't tell me to wash my hands. You can't tell me to wear a mask. That's typically, I think, what this country is kind of sourced around. But for me, freedom is more about actually having a freedom to do things, right? Not a negative liberty, but a positive. But not just for me. And I think this is also where I learn a lot from indigenous people. I think that even as much as I love like Marx and all this kind of socialist stuff, the relationship to and the responsibility to, as was said, to the earth and to other living creatures is often vacant. So it's not just about my personal positive liberty. It's about actually everything and everybody having the most space to be their most abundant self. So if I accept that as my premise, then I have to accept that this system that we live under right now is not going to cut it. Not that it needs to be reformed, but that it needs to be replaced. And so for me, like, systems problems require system solutions. It's very like buzzy to talk about systemic racism. And yet for a lot of people, that means, well, just put some Black people in charge, right? But the system is still the system. I don't think that it's just like, I mean, how can I say this without being too shady? But if I were to show you a picture of all the white leadership at an institution, some people would seriously suggest that if we just sprinkle some color in there, like, it will fix the problem. I think that actually fundamentally that is not the system. So yeah, I want to change the system in all the ways so that we can have the most abundance in our lives and on the planet. And I think part of the difficulty in getting there is just having people. It's not about politics, actually. I think it's more fundamental. I was just yesterday teaching some of the work of the Slovenian philosopher and psychoanalyst Slavoj Žižek, and like, he has this idea that, you know, we actually, before we start talking politics, we actually have to change our dreaming, like, because our dreams stage our desires, and that's where all of our action comes from. But if you change your dreams, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a lot of dissatisfaction. You know, if you dream too big, then you've got a long way to fall if you fail, right? So it's and this is not this is not Republican, Democrat, black, white. This is just human. To dare to dream, to change a system, asks quite a lot. So although I like to see my work as political education, I'm increasingly aware that I actually have to, there's a conversation before that, that is about daring people or helping people dare to be bold dreamers, so that we can really change the things we need to have the things we want. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Other panelists want to jump in with this question?
I mean, if we're talking about in connection to theater, um, I guess I want like true investment in not just the art that's created, but in the creators themselves and the artists themselves. And I think that's often separated in a really weird way that drives me nuts. But you know, I think there's definitely a lot that theaters could do more of, or differently. We're also in a country that doesn't really value any of this, and there's not a frame. You know, the framework doesn't really allow for us to know that our artists are provided with just basic care. I mean, I always say that I hate that I've had to argue for why artists need to get health insurance from the theaters I've been at, which, like, I will just argue that for a long time. But if this country cared about its people and its survival, I could channel that energy that I'm usually trying to get health insurance for artists into actually honing processes further towards like the artistry of the folks that I'm supporting. And I guess that's why I've been interested in investigating that, meaning the like corrupted foundations we're on. And then I get put into this direction of, you know, people power and all the amplifying activists together stuff I'm doing, while sort of simultaneously trying to embed it in the processes I'm building at whatever theater I'm at. So it's sort of like a two-pronged thing. Um, but there's a lot of obstacles because of how it was built originally, you know. So it's uh, the idea of abundance and of like people being supported on a basic level, and then also supported in what their passions are, and specifically bolstered and specifically challenged and supported the way that the folks who are that are best placed in that position are challenged and supported. Um, that I guess would be my goal, and that's what I'm trying to move towards.
Lisa or Alejo or Iakowi, things that your goals, what you're moving towards?
Goals or what I am moving towards. Um, I think for the most part, what I feel very strongly about and what I've come to understand is and coming and looking at it from a criminal justice lens more specifically, and how criminal justice has been applied in this country, the that the current state in dealing with prisons has less to do with crime and punishment, has more to do with social control. And as I begin to peel back the layers of that onion, I begin to see that since the inception of people being in this land, colonizers being in this land, it's always been about social control of the people they colonized when they were here, and of those who they enslaved to come here, and the different iterations that played out in their exploitation. And currently, right now, that form of exploitation is mass incarceration. It's how we criminalize based on skin. And so, one of my goals, personally, I just feel very much committed that as so long as we using prisons or using efforts to social control, we're never going to really fully be human. We're never going to really fully live up to this claim that we call all men are created equal and inalienable rights. Like, how do you get if you have inalienable rights, how come they get alienated because of a felony? You just said it was inalienable a minute ago. It's like them those contradictions I have problem with. So unless these things are eradicated, um, uh, uh, that's one of my goals, right? And in my dream of that goal is to challenge, and I'm God willing, working towards creating an organization or organizing through Zealous with my work, efforts to challenge the clause in the 13th Amendment, but primarily first starting in New York State, in the first clause, in the first article and third article of the New York State Constitution. So that's like some far-reaching goals that I would like to be able to achieve. And what motivates me of this work is being able to um, like reclaim the purpose of what the arts have always been about. For some reason along the line, arts has been falling into this place of just entertainment, of just something to make us, distract us, do something when we're not working. When at one time arts was a critical aspect in all cultures, in a critical aspect of sharing community histories, of teaching, of our form of social media, of educating. Like, the arts was central, right, to so many ways for people to be able to articulate their dissatisfaction, if you would, with the way things have been playing out, or just articulating goals and dreams of their community. And so, looking at applying my work and the arts in which I incorporate in the work in that way as well.
That is powerful. We need to reinforce those messages about reclaiming the purpose of what the arts is about, and the arts being critical aspect of all cultures. It's very powerful. Lisa Yagawihine, do either of you want to jump in?
I will jump in, but but not if Yagawihine wants to speak first.
You can go first.
Okay. God, so inspired by everybody on this call. And Alejo, I want to say absolutely, no, I didn't mean it romantically about the heart. I mean, I have an angry, restless heart. And I think that's, work, I agree with you that work often comes from rage or from restlessness, as well as from curiosity and sense of justice and ethics. I'm just going to read everything that Chris has advised that we take a look at. I'll be doing that. But I guess my own personal mission is, when the regional theaters were formed, they were formed in reaction to New York to return theater to communities beyond New York, or to establish a space for theater in communities beyond New York, to decenter And it really started out of a populist in the best sense kind of impulse. And since then, those theaters have become quite calcified, right? And so I guess my life goal, and I don't know if I'll get to it in my lifetime, but where I'm trying to run the ball is to return the arts to their specific local communities, and to open access across the board to across class and ethnicity, race and gender to the arts. I feel like arts, the theater particularly, which is an art by and for the people, should be by and for the many peoples. And instead it is, as we all know, kind of controlled by one segment of the population due to capitalism and comfort and many other things. And so that's, I think, my life's work. And the great thing about the pandemic, and it's a weird thing to say, but the great thing about the pandemic is it's rattling the walls pretty hard. And theaters will have to. It's not even a question of like all that work we were doing before, you know, the field was doing before in terms of we should do some ED&I work, or we should change our audiences. It's going to have to be done. As a friend, Natasha Garrett, says, it's like 60% of the audience isn't coming back. So you better figure out, you know, what you're doing and who's coming and who's making it, who it's for, because there's no choice about kind of about engaging new audiences. It must be done. There's no choice about changing the form. It must be done. There's no choice anymore. And so I'd be interested to see how far we run this ball in this time.
Great, thank you. And Iakowi, do you want to jump in too?
Sure. Okay, so what are we moving towards? I think what I try to do most when having programming is create individual shifts in thinking and rethinking frameworks that we're conditioned to or that people are conditioned to. That's a large part of the way I organize, and implementing that even in little sneaky ways, like by surprise and some programming, you know, in healthy ways, of course, to sort of wean people, not just like Ungwehue, but mostly a lot of other people who might not have these sort of teachings to follow, that, you know, what you all call the United States and we call Turtle Island, Anuala Goa in Mohawk. This is not the land of exploitation. You know, this American dream, that's basically what that means to us. This is not that. We are still here. Accumulation, possession, ownership, like it's time to like wean yourselves off of all of those things, because where we're at right now should be a lesson. And to get people to try to understand that, you know, in deeper ways, that this is all wrong. You know, we have to dig deeper within self and what's truly sacred with ourselves in relation to creation and everything around us, the land and everything that exists so we can exist in balance. I'm just basically moving towards that. Everything from like, you know, just even Native theater, inadvertently sharing stories and lessons from other natives that reflect on their human experiences in regards to the conflict that occurs with their true nature and traditions and culture in conflict with, you know, Western society and things we have to deal with today. I think it's good for us to continue to share that work, and that's why I'm really pushing that within my community, so you can all also see from our eyes, our lenses, and our perspectives, and maybe learn something, and also like get to know us, you know, because I don't know like how many of you know that there's 574 different nations in the United States, Native American nations in the United States. How many of you know that there's 112,000 American or indigenous folks or Native Americans in New York City alone? We have the largest population of urban natives in the US, and we're completely underfunded, completely underrepresented. You know, anything distinct about the nations that we come from is just sort of erased and glazed over by terms like indigenous. We all have very distinct nations, and that needs to be acknowledged. And people that are non-native need to realize that and respect that and learn about us, whose land you're on, you know, what sort of lifeways occurred here. These are just things that I try to incorporate in our programming, not just for the benefit of my community, but also for potential allies or just people that are just unaware and are looking to learn. Yeah, so just creating an overall awareness and respect, and also inclusion, and an understanding that, you know, we are distinct nations under this umbrella term of indigenous. And, you know, for me as an individual, I don't even like being called indigenous. I prefer people to call me by my nation, you know, because we're not in conflict. Like we experience a lot of racism, constant racism. But like a lot of our issues are very political and nation to nation, because we do have treaties with these governments and we have sovereign nations within another nation. So, you know, we have just so much going on. I'm not even going to get into all of that, but to try to, for non-natives to try to start understanding that, and maybe contribute as opposed to continually benefit from our erasure or the taking of our land and resources, or, you know, just figure out ways to assist in advocating, is also another priority that I've been working on for a couple of years now in rallying allies at the American Indian Community House. So yeah, so those are things that I'm moving towards currently.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those thoughts and what offerings all of you have given to all of us. And I'm wondering if we could just use the chat for a moment, and if people feel comfortable just sharing something that they're thinking about now that they weren't thinking about an hour ago, something they want to read, something they're considering differently, because we've organized today. We're part of a little organizing group, and I think it's actually powerful to think about the ways that each engagement you are involved with can impact you. So if we wouldn't mind, if you all wouldn't mind just using the chat just for a moment before we wrap up, and sharing those things, I think those would be really powerful. We feel so lucky to be in such great company with the five of you. And we can send you a follow-up with information if you have any questions, you want to get more involved, you want to donate and support any of these efforts that these wonderful artists are helming. That would be very powerful. And thank you so much, community, for taking the time and the care to be here and to consider the way that you're engaging. And we're just going to let the chat run for a moment too.
I just have another thing to share. I think maybe this might bring some joy to Alejo. Um, Recently, the American Indian Community House, I, as a signer on behalf of AICH, entered into a class action lawsuit with New York City, de Blasio, and the new jails that are proposed to replace Rikers Island or Rikers Prison. We actually won a class action lawsuit that we entered into just recently. It was announced a few weeks ago. Of course, the city's appealing it. However, we did that. We beat them for round one. But part of that is also sort of, is absolutely in alignment with things that are within like the great law tenets as well. And sort of like, we're trying to stand up for those that, we don't believe in putting people in cages, in other words. And the fact that there's possible archaeological findings underneath the ground there, based on one of their environmental impact studies, there's moderate findings. So that's how we won, but also the fact that it was non-consensual. There was no consultation at all with Native Americans, and that's also something that I am advocating for and fighting for in all sectors of us being within this society. But yeah, so we sort of put a halt to that, but the city is moving forward with the builders or the architects or something. Like they didn't just lose. They're continually still having planning sessions and disregarding the fact that, the court on our behalf, like we won, and yeah. So that's how dismissive and how much they disregard the rule of law, their own rule of law. And I don't know, do we have like a couple of minutes?
Sure, for those who can stay, that would, yes.
Yeah. I just wrote like a simple piece for the press release, the press conference, when they announced that we're entering into this, and I'll read it for you. Oh yeah. Non-consensual desecration and continual violations of the natural law of the land and its Ungwehue, original people, past, present, and future, needs to stop. Systemic exclusion and the lack of consultation in relation to Ungwehue Neha, the original peoples in our way of life, have carried on long enough. Erasure of our people and voices has always been a convenient strategy for the settler, also known as settler colonial violence. But today, like any other, we continue to confront injustice and challenge racist systems and their practices to do better, be inclusive, and stop neglecting Ungwehue Neha, the original people of this land, in our life ways. Lack of consultation and consent, whereas any pre-colonial archaeological findings are involved, such as in this case in particular, should sanction an entire committee of Ungwehue, original peoples. Traditional leadership and delegates of the Northeastern regional land base should be included within the decision-making process, and such practices should be bound within New York City's protocol. Without improved process, consideration, and inclusion of Ungwehue, NYC would be in violation of its treaty obligations within the Two-Row Wampum and its Silver Chain Covenant, remaining consistently aligned with the doctrine of discovery and genocide of Ungwehue Neha, the original peoples in our way of life. Yeah, so I don't know if any of you know about this lawsuit. Yeah, any support would be appreciated. I'm not sure if at any point, hoping that we don't get bullied by the city. I was sort of like okay with diving into this lawsuit, one, because I am a fighter, I grew up with the Warrior Society. That's my family, that's my people. And it's just a responsibility. If we could use our voice for that, I stepped into that. Also, the city hasn't done anything for us as Native Americans or as American Indians. So there was really not much to lose. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Powerful. Thank you for sharing what that fight is about and talking about ways that we can potentially support that too. So we will officially wrap up, although we hate to because it would be actually really more important to be in a room together talking more, much more about how we can continue to change the world together individually and collectively. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdoms and all of your offerings. We're really, really grateful to all of you. And we look forward to continuing to amplify your work however we can. So have a beautiful evening and to be continued.